I was seconds away from kissing my mother-in-law's hands to keep the peace when a team of tactical operatives smashed through the door. They didn't just ruin the party, they presented evidence of an organized scheme so severe that I was facing an enormous term behind bars for crimes I never committed. The mahogany door of the estate groaned as it swung open, revealing the cavernous, opulent hallway that always smelled faintly of overpriced lilies and old money. I stood there, adjusting my tie, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of my wife's family's expectations. Tonight was the big jubilee. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, was turning 70, and the entire city's elite had been summoned to witness her grandeur. As I stepped over the threshold, the silence of the house felt predatory. Eleanor was standing at the top of the grand staircase, a woman carved out of cold marble and spite. She wore a gown that probably cost more than my parents' house, draped in jewels that caught the light like frozen tears. I began the ascent, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble, counting the steps as I climbed toward my own personal hell. When I reached the landing, I didn't offer a polite handshake or a greeting. I didn't even get the chance. "Look at it," she sneered, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "A low-born mutt stumbling into my house, thinking he belongs in the presence of nobility." My wife, Sarah, hovered in the background, her face a mask of practiced indifference. She had warned me before we left, whispering that I should just play along to keep the inheritance peace. But hearing those words, seeing that absolute, unadulterated disgust in Eleanor's eyes, sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "I'm here for the dinner, Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my blood was boiling. "Let's keep this civil for Sarah's sake." She descended a single step, encroaching on my space, the scent of her expensive perfume becoming suffocatingly thick. "Civil? You think someone like you earns civility? You are a guest in my domain by my grace alone. If you want to remain under this roof, you will humble yourself. You will show the proper respect for the bloodline you've tried so desperately to contaminate." She held out her hands, bony, ring-encrusted, and trembling with a strange, manic energy. "Kiss them," she commanded, her tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "Kiss my hands and acknowledge your place, or you will find yourself back on the street you crawled out of before the appetizers are even served." I looked at Sarah, but she looked away, her eyes fixed on a painting on the wall. I felt the heat rising in my neck. This wasn't just about arrogance. It was a power move designed to break me, to turn me into a dog in front of everyone who mattered to her. I stared at Eleanor, her eyes glinting with a dark, almost hungry triumph. I realized then that she didn't just want my obedience, she wanted my soul. I reached out, my hand hovering just inches from her skin, the air between us thick with the tension of a snapping wire. Just as my lips were about to touch her cold skin, the heavy oak doors at the entrance burst open with a crash that echoed like a gunshot. The sound wasn't the arrival of guests. It was the synchronized, rhythmic thud of combat boots. A dozen men in tactical gear swarmed the hall, their faces hidden behind dark visors. One of them pointed a piece of illegal equipment directly at Eleanor's throat. "Everyone on the ground!" the leader barked, his voice distorted by his mask. "Internal security investigation. We have a warrant for the entire premises." My heart stopped. Eleanor went pale, her hands dropping to her sides as the reality of the situation shifted instantly from domestic cruelty to something far more dangerous. The leader of the group stepped forward, staring directly at me, and pulled a thick manila folder from his vest. "We aren't here for the jubilee," he growled, locking eyes with me. "We're here because we found out exactly who you've been working for, and the organized scheme you've been financing isn't just about money anymore." The floorboards seemed to vibrate under the weight of the intruders. Eleanor, the woman who had demanded my subservience mere seconds ago, suddenly looked like a fragile, wilting flower. Her composure, that ironclad armor of superiority, shattered, leaving her trembling against the banister. I stood frozen, my mind racing. What organized scheme? What were they talking about? I was a simple architect. My life revolved around blueprints, not back-alley shadows. "You have the wrong house." Sarah finally found her voice, her tone shrill and panicked. She stepped forward, shielding Eleanor, but the lead operative didn't even blink. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at me. He walked straight up, the metal of his illegal weapon pressing cold and hard against my collarbone. "We've been tracking the movement of packages with restricted substances for months," the operative said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intimate register. "And guess whose digital signature is all over the accounts? The low-born mutt, who isn't as poor as he pretends to be." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's impossible," I managed to stutter, my hands raised instinctively. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm an architect. I design buildings, not—" "You design exits," he interrupted, pulling a photograph from the folder. It was grainy, showing me meeting a man in a parking lot, a man I had never seen in my life. The man in the photo was handing me a heavy briefcase. I stared at it, horrified. It was a deep fake, a perfectly crafted piece of evidence meant to destroy me. But as I looked closer, I realized with a sickening jolt that the background of the photo was the construction site I had been working on for the last 3 months. Eleanor let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "I told you," she whispered, her voice laced with a newfound, terrifying delight. "I told you that you were a viper. I didn't think you'd be caught this quickly." "Shut it, lady," the operative growled, his gaze never leaving mine. "We have a report that you're involved in a massive conspiracy. If you don't start talking, you're looking at an enormous term behind bars. We know about the storage locker in the North District. We know about the contents." My knees buckled. A storage locker? I didn't even own a car. I looked at Sarah, begging for her to defend me, to tell them I had been with her every night, but she was backing away, her eyes wide with a calculated, chilling realization. She wasn't scared for me. She was distancing herself. She was performing for the cameras that were undoubtedly hidden in the walls of this mansion. "Sarah, please," I pleaded, but she turned her back on me. "I had no idea," she said to the room, her voice cold and rehearsed. "He always told me he was working late on the new cathedral project. I feel sick." The operative grabbed my arm, his grip like a steel vice. "We're done here," he muttered into his radio. "Bring the team in, strip the mansion. We need to find the rest of the ledger before it burns." As he dragged me toward the door, I looked back at the grand staircase. Eleanor was standing there, the light from the chandelier casting long, distorted shadows over her face. She wasn't just watching. She was smiling. It was a look of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. I realized then that this wasn't a random raid. This was a setup. She had been orchestrating this from the moment I married her daughter, waiting for the perfect public moment to throw me to the wolves. We reached the front door and the cold night air hit my face. But before they could shove me into the unmarked van, the leader paused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic device that began to emit a high-pitched, rhythmic hum. He held it up to my ear. "Listen closely," he hissed. "This isn't just about the substances. We found something else in your office safe. A flash drive containing the names of everyone in the Internal Security Department who is currently on your payroll." My breath hitched. "That's a lie," I whispered. "I don't have a safe." "You don't," he agreed, his eyes narrowing to slits as a black SUV screeched around the corner, lights blinding us. "But you will when the trial begins." He opened the back of the van, and as I looked inside, I saw not just weapons, but a man sitting there in handcuffs, the very same man from the grainy photograph. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying, hollow recognition, and he spoke 3 words that made the ground disappear beneath my feet. "Nice to meet you, boss." The man in the back of the van, the one they called my associate, smiled, a jagged, broken expression that made my skin crawl. He knew exactly what he was doing. This entire theater was designed to ensure I had no way to explain the truth, no audience to listen, and no time to breathe. As the heavy steel doors slammed shut, plunging us into darkness, the weight of the situation felt like a mountain pressing against my chest. I sat in silence for what felt like hours, listening to the hum of the tires on the pavement. My mind raced through every interaction with Sarah. Every moment Eleanor had looked at me with that icy, calculating disdain. It all clicked into place. The generous job offer from Eleanor's firm, the private office I was gifted, the constant insistence that I manage the logistics of the construction project alone. She'd been building a cage around me, brick by brick, using my name to anchor a mountain of illegal activity. When the van finally screeched to a halt, the doors were ripped open to reveal not a police station, but an isolated industrial hangar on the edge of the city. I was dragged out, my feet stumbling on the uneven concrete. Waiting in the center of the vast, hollow space was not a lead investigator, but Eleanor herself. She had changed into a sharp, charcoal gray suit, looking less like a grieving mother-in-law and more like a queen of a criminal empire. "You really were a convenient vessel," she said, her voice echoing in the rafters. She signaled for the operatives to step back. They moved with a military precision that left no doubt. They didn't answer to the government. They answered to her. "You set me up," I gasped, the cold realization anchoring my heart. The storage locker, the digital signatures, the bribes. It was all you. Eleanor walked slowly toward me, her heels clicking a rhythmic death march on the floor. "My dear boy, you were a liability from the start. You were too honest, too observant. You were starting to notice the discrepancies in the site materials, the off-books transactions. You would have gone to the authorities eventually. I simply decided to get there first with a narrative that would ensure you never have a voice again." She leaned in close, her scent of lilies now cloying and sickening. "The Internal Security Department is on my payroll, as you've already been told. You aren't going to a trial. You're going to a private facility where you will confess to every charge, the illegal weapons, the illicit goods, the whole organized scheme, in exchange for a lenient deal. If you don't, your parents will face the same charges. Do you understand?" I looked at her, and for the first time, the fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I had been an architect, yes, but an architect learns how to plan for structural failure. I knew that when a building is sabotaged from the foundation, you don't fight the collapse, you trigger the fail-safe. "You think you've won," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But you forgot one thing, Eleanor. I didn't just design the cathedral, I designed the entire security network for your estate." Her brow furrowed, a flicker of genuine irritation crossing her face. "What are you talking about?" "Every camera, every server, every private communication line in your house and office runs through a central node I installed," I continued, feeling a dark satisfaction as her eyes widened. "And that node is programmed to auto-upload to a public cloud server every time it detects a system override. The moment your thugs grabbed me, they triggered a forced exit protocol. By now, the local news, the national press, and the legitimate authorities have received a full encrypted package of every single transaction, every illicit meeting, and every conversation you've had regarding this setup." Her face went pale, the mask of arrogance slipping completely. She whipped out her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled. Her eyes darted across the screen, and I watched the color drain from her face until she looked as ghostly as the mansion she lived in. "It's over, Eleanor," I said, my voice echoing off the hangar walls. "You wanted to bury me in an enormous term for crimes I didn't commit? Well, it looks like you've provided the perfect blueprint for your own incarceration." Outside, the faint sound of sirens began to swell, growing louder and more insistent by the second. The operatives looked at each other, panic clearly visible behind their masks. The tables had turned with the finality of a lock clicking shut. As the hangar doors exploded inward under the force of the real authorities, not the ones she owned, but the ones she had spent a lifetime trying to avoid, I finally felt the weight lift. The jubilee was over, and it was time for the curtain to fall on the empire of lilies and lies. I stood tall, watching as the woman who had demanded I kiss her hands was forced to her knees, not by me, but by the weight of her own greed. I was finally free,